So for these last set of videos, I'm going to try and tackle composition and production together because the two can be related, at least in the way that I like to approach it. The first thing I want to talk about is the general role of each instrument in a traditional metal band. I'll be covering drums, bass, rhythm guitar, lead guitar, and vocals. Synth is also an option, but I'm not going to go into detail on it just because I don't use it that much. So every instrument contributes in some way to timbre and rhythm. These are just inherent properties of music. But they also have unique roles in the way that they contribute to a standard metal outfit. I'm going to start with the drums. Everyone associates drums with keeping rhythm, but like I mentioned before, this is something that's shared between all instruments. There's always a level of syncopation that's present, whether it's between the guitar riffs, the vocal meters, melodies, and even bass lines. The drums, however, do have a unique ability to create really strong accents on certain beats, which I've said earlier in videos, that can have a huge effect on the pace of your music. This is usually done through the snare, but it also comes in through the cymbals and bass drum patterns as well. The ability to influence the pace of a song really plays an important role in how your music is going to end up sounding. The bass line is commonly used to fill out lower frequencies in your song and hold pedal points. This is usually done by having it play the root note of the chord progression with little to no rhythmic variation. Of course, the consequence of this is that the bass is usually buried in the mix because it's given such a minor role, which is something that I disagree with personally. It's not really only the result of leveling out the bass, but when you're playing something that has no rhythmic or harmonic variation, it's going to blend in with everything else, namely the guitar. This is a production issue, but it stems from composition. Guitars are split into two categories. I'll start with rhythm guitar. The role is obviously to play the riff, the key components to a metal song. It's self-explanatory, but I think it's worth it to think about what a riff actually is. I'm just repeating old points that I've already made, but a riff has rhythmic and harmonic components. So what it's doing is providing a rhythmic and harmonic background for the rest of the music to perform with. The foil to the rhythm guitar is the lead guitarist. The lead guitarist creates melodies, and this is really done when the vocalist is taking a break between verses, creating room for the leads to exist as well as designated solos. Most bands approach this by having a dedicated rhythm guitarist along with a rhythm/lead, or two rhythm/leads where both guitarists are doubling up during verses and just switching off during lead parts. This is not how I approach it myself, but I'll get to it later in the video. For now, I'm sticking with the standard metal band. Finally, we have the vocalist. I'm going to start with the clean vocalist. Clean vocalists are a special case where it's an instrument that has not only one but multiple major roles. One is delivering the lyrics. The other is the duty of creating their own melodies and providing harmonic contrast like a lead guitarist. Because of this, the vocalist ends up getting prioritized over the rest of the instruments. From a harmonic standpoint, music can typically survive with up to 3 layers of melodies. Any more and you really start to get conflicts. Through the course of a song, you'll usually have a doubling of melodies between the vocals and the rhythm guitar, or the lead and the rhythm guitar. Occasionally all 3 at once. Bands that use synth are going to have an additional layer on top, which is why it's hard to produce synth occasionally, just because of how it interferes with everything else from a frequency standpoint. Now let's consider harsh vocals instead. Harsh vocals are mainly an aesthetic thing, but in a way they also exist out of necessity. As the use of harsh vocals goes up, the demand for clean vocalists goes down, which then reduces the supply. So when new bands are forming and they need a vocalist, the guitarist or the bassist, sometimes even the drummer, just doubles up on that role. While clean vocal ability can be practiced, it requires a level of innate physiology. You can't just sing like Bruce by practicing every day, you have to be born with it. But harsh vocals can be built up. The skill can be developed over time. So it does happen that harsh vocals have aesthetically and also naturally taken over in extreme metal. When you need cleans, you just kind of suck it up and do them really poorly like me. The consequence of having harsh vocals is the following. The vocalist no longer plays a primary role in delivering a melody and creating this harmonic layer. It mainly becomes lyrical and, like all other instruments, timbre and rhythmic. So this is what a general metal outfit looks like. My approach is a little bit different because I disagree with some of the ways that this is organized. When I write for my own project, I treat it like it's a live jazz band. Everyone has their own role and I give each player their moments to contribute. One of the first things that I noticed was that harsh vocals free up a spot in harmonic space for a new layer of melodies. I imagine myself as the vocalist/lead guitarist, so there's no way I'm playing anything complicated on the guitar while singing. I'm just not good enough to do that. So I took this part, this empty space, and I gave it to the bass, expanding its role to become a major contributor in my music. My bass player doesn't hammer out roots, they add harmonic layers. Another thing I do really differently is that I isolate the rhythm and lead guitarist, which leads to single track guitars, something that's really rare in metal. The standard metal band double tracks and hard pans their guitars. Both guys are playing the same riff at the same time. It's redundant, but it's also required to fill out stereoscopic space because of the panning. Stereoscopic is just a fancy word that I use to say where each track is localized. Now something happens when we get to leads though. The vocalist sits in the center and usually drops out, which means the lead's job is to fill in that spot. 99% of the time, that means you get a third guitar track for leads, while the double track rhythms keep going. The traditional band has two guitarists, so the sound is impossible to recreate live unless you play with loop pedals, double outputs for rhythms, or someone has four arms. Another note is that you don't hard pan live. That's not what happens because the whole band's just concentrated on one stage. So this is not something that I do with my jazz band approach. If we maintain the double tracking, the alternative is that the lead guitarist just drops the rhythm and picks up the lead. Because the guitars are hard pan, that means you have a riff in one ear and a solo in the other ear, which creates a huge discrepancy in what you're listening to, and it can be disorienting, so I don't do this either. The way that I approach this is that I single track the guitar and I soft pan it, which means you can hear it in both ears, slightly better in one than the other. The opposite side is then taken by the bass, which plays a role similar to another rhythm guitarist in my band. This automatically improves the audibility of the bass, the ability for it to be heard by separating it stereoscopically. You also move it away from the bass drum, which usually sits in the center as well, and that's a huge consumer of bass lines. Double track rhythms means the bass is right in the middle between two huge sounds, so it's easy to get lost, especially if you scoop your mids, which a lot of bands do, because it effectively works as a treble and a bass boost, so there's frequency interference as well that's eating up the bass track. Another consequence of scooping mids is that you lose a lot of depth, and this actually necessitates double tracking in order to sound full. I avoid this altogether by boosting my mids on my guitar so that when I soft pan, which I do 20% to the right, it doesn't feel as empty. With the bass complementing at 20% left, I can make up for all of this, but that's really enough talking about production for now. With composition, my method really gives me free rein to do a lot of things harmonically. My bass lines are basically built on harmonizing the riff and playing things like counterpoint, as I've shown before. When it comes to solos, I can even throw together triple harmonies like I did on Nightmare between the bass and multiple guitar tracks, although in this case, I do grow another hand for a third guitar. This sound is something that's basically established as a part of my style, and I really do prefer the aesthetic, even though it's rare to find this kind of sound in metal. That's pretty much the basics on compositional roles and how I approach composing for my own project. I gave a lot of background on production, which is going to come in handy when I break it down next, but I'll revisit composition concurrently because a lot of these ideas are related. In the meantime, the next time you listen to a song, try to pick out the individual tracks and how to hear different bands choose to organize their sound.